Hi, welcome to 1930s Film. And today we're going to be talking about Sullivan's Travels. Um, Sullivan's Travels is a 1941 film, so we're kind of out of the 30s into the early 40s. It's a satirical comedy written and directed by Preston Sturges. Preston Sturges was a successful and well-known American playwright, screenwriter, and then later film director. He's initially known as a writer, right, both for the stage and the screen, and was known for writing a lot of comedies during the Great Depression in the 1930s. And he had already won an Academy Award for screenwriting he won an Academy Award for screenwriting for a previous film, The Great McGinty, in 1941, the year that this movie came out. And he transitions sort of with Sullivan's Travels and with other movies in the early 40s from a writer to a director, which actually wasn't very common at the time. 4 of his films are on the American Film Institute's list of best 100 comedies in American movie history: The Lady Eve, The Palm Beach Story, The Miracle of Morgan's Creek, and Sullivan's Travels. Starring Joel McCrea and Veronica Lake. McCrea was a well-known actor, really at the peak of his career in the early 1940s. He had a very well-established long acting career that lasted over 5 decades. This is actually one of Veronica Lake's first starring roles. She would go on to be famous for being cast as sort of the femme fatale in a lot of 1940s film noir films. Her career ended, unfortunately, in the late 1940s because of her alcoholism, which would eventually cause her death at the age of 50. And she's kind of become sort of this icon, this kind of mysterious, tragic icon of classic Hollywood. She's known for what's called her peekaboo hairstyle. And the ad campaign for the film often focused on this. Veronica Lake was actually 6 months pregnant when she was filming it, and supposedly Preston Sturges got quite upset when he found out about this because she had not originally revealed this when she was auditioning, which totally fine. Edith Head, incredibly famous Hollywood costume designer, does the costuming for Veronica Lake for this film and does an incredible job with the costuming of sort of hiding it and working around it. But, kind of see if you can spot sort of what Edith Head is doing creatively with the costuming. The title Sullivan's Travels is from Gulliver's Travels, a satirical novel written in the 1720s by Jonathan Swift, about a journey of self-discovery into strange and faraway places. So you can kind of see from once you watch the film how it's picking up from that title. The film actually initially got mixed reviews and didn't do that well at the box office. One important reason as to why is it was released December 5th, 1941. And what happens 2 days later? Pearl Harbor and the bombing of Pearl Harbor and the U.S. entry into World War II. So, that kind of overshadows people's desire to go see sort of satirical comedies. There's also kind of this shift in public consciousness that's taking place out of the Great Depression and into World War II. So even though this movie is made in 1941, it still really is a movie of the Great Depression. And it's really kind of playing upon a lot of the themes and tropes of films from the Great Depression. Also, many people at the time and even today really don't know what to make of its genre mixing. It's technically a comedy, but it's also a drama. It swings back and forth quite a bit in tone throughout the film. It draws on conventions and styles from melodrama, screwball comedy, social problem films, the slapstick comedy, the road movie, romance films, the prison film, action film, musicals, even cartoons. For example, you'll get to see some explicit drawing on I'm a Fugitive from a Chain Gang, even in some of the casting, so keep your eye open. Although the film's reputation has improved over time and is now considered a classic, especially as a film about Hollywood commenting on itself. I mean, that's kind of a genre that Hollywood loves now, like Hollywood making films about Hollywood commenting on itself. But this is one of the first films that really explicitly does this. And it's a mixture of sort of politics in the film. The film is often seen as Preston Sturges commenting on his own career and his own film style. He was actually seen as pretty apolitical. He was seen as pretty apolitical or non-political, even during the Great Depression. And the idea for the story, Sturgis says, was the result of, quote, an urge to tell some of my fellow film wrights that they were getting a little too deep dish and to leave the preaching to the preachers. Sullivan's Travels could really have been a little pamphlet sent around privately. Maybe it should have been. But is the film actually really apolitical? Is there something deeper than that, than what Sturgis admits to the film? And I think that's definitely something worthy of discussion. So you'll read about the Popular Front in one of the articles for today, and some of the recommended readings for this film, if you do the paper, connect this movie to the influence of the Popular Front. So what is the Popular Front exactly? Briefly, it was a loosely organized group of artists, musicians, writers, performers, and others in creative occupations, so not just Hollywood, but in creative industries in general, who supported socialism and communism and socialist and communist causes in the 1930s and used their creative output to critique capitalism. So Sullivan's Travels, because Sullivan, the character of Sullivan, the main character, who is a filmmaker, a guy who makes comedy movies and wants to make a serious movie, he can be read as a character that is making fun of many Hollywood directors' attempts at left-wing political messages in their films during the 1930s. But is there also an underlying influence of popular front politics within the larger text of the film? Is just simply just sort of satirizing the desire of certain directors to try to dive into serious left-wing politics, or is there some, I think, political critique deeper in there? This goes to that overarching question that we've been talking about in terms of film. We've been touching on this, I think, throughout the semester a little bit. Can movies or any kind of popular culture project inspire social change, or is it simply escapism, or can it be both? Can comedy and laughter serve a larger social and political purpose? Little side note, little bit of trivia. Filmmakers Joel and Ethan Coen pay homage to Preston Sturgis by naming their film set during the Great Depression that was made in 2000, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? A film with George Clooney. And actually, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou is the name of the socially conscious film that the comedy director Sullivan wants to make in the film about the conflict between labor and capital. So, the Coen brothers are very much steeped in film history. So they're, even the Coen brothers are connecting back to this film, Sullivan's Travels. So questions to think about when you're watching the film. What scenes are about social realism and commentary, and what scenes are about comedy and making the audience laugh, and what scenes are both? And how are more comedic scenes and more dramatic scenes sort of differentialized? What film techniques are used to distinguish them? For example, think about lighting or shot size, if you know what these are, film speed, use of music. Which scenes do you think are more effective and why? And what purpose do you think the shifts in tone and the oscillation between comedy and drama serve? Sometimes the comedic scenes are sped up to emphasize wackiness. You get some use of montage with literal no dialogue to indicate the passage of time, which isn't as common at that time as it is now. Think about how kind of the spaces of Hollywood and the more comedic moments contrast with the spaces of poor areas and shanty towns and the prison, and how all of these devices add up more than just mere film tricks, by focusing our attention on the artificial nature of the film industry. Does Sturgis take the audience down Sullivan's path to the truth that he learns, right? This is Hollywood. These are movies. People don't go to movies to see real life. They go to be entertained. That's kind of the lesson. And how does the film help construct that lesson in the way that the shift in the tone shifts between comedy and drama? The film ends with a line spoken by Sullivan, quote, "There's a lot to be said for making people laugh. Did you know that's all some people have? It isn't much, but it's better than nothing in this cockeyed caravan." So what do you think is the message, intentional or unintentional, of the film? Does this final statement summarize it? Or is there a more complex interpretation of the film? How do the comedic and the non-comedic scenes of the film, for example, showing poverty, shantytowns, prison life, operate in relation to this message? Um, so what is the journey that Sullivan goes through during the film, and what are the stages of his story? And I want us to think about how it may fit kind of a classic hero's journey, or maybe kind of subvert it a bit. And just Google the hero's journey mythic structure, Joseph Campbell, or the monomyth, and that should give you an idea of what the hero's journey is. And in the questions for film viewing, there's actually a link to that. Also in the film, Veronica Lake's character is known simply as the girl. Her name is never given. At one point, Sullivan states, quote, "There's always a girl in the picture. Haven't you ever been to the movies?" So how does Sullivan's statement and the characterization of the girl within the film connect to larger constructions of gender and sexuality? And how would sort of Veronica Lake's public persona outside the text of the film also connect to how audiences interpret her character in terms of gender and sexuality? I mean, she was kind of this up and coming, the next hot starlet, and can you really remove that from the way people are going to interpret her in the film? And also think about in the film, she's explicitly put in boys' clothes to kind of help kind of navigate riding the rails and living in sort of more impoverished areas with Sullivan. And so how does that kind of play into some of these conventions about gender and sexuality at the time too? So after the release of the film, Walter White, who was the secretary of the NAACP, wrote the following to director Preston Sturges, quote, "I want to congratulate and thank you for the church sequence in Sullivan's Travels. This is one of the most moving scenes I've ever seen in a motion picture for a long time, but I'm particularly grateful to you, as are a number of my friends, both white and colored, for the dignified and decent treatment of Negroes in that scene. I was in Hollywood recently, and I am to return there soon for conferences with production heads, writers, directors, and actors and actresses in an effort to induce broader and more decent picturization of the Negro instead of limiting him to menial or comic roles. The sequence in Sullivan's Travels is a step in that direction, and I want you to know how grateful we all are," end quote. So with that in mind, how are African Americans represented in the film? And how do you think this representation was interpreted in the context of early 1940s America? I mean, there's two very clear scenes. The scene that Walter White, the secretary of the NAACP, is talking about is the church scene at the end. But there's also I think an example earlier in the film being guilty the exact same criticism that White is saying other films are problematic because of, and that's these kind of slapstick, menial sort of comedic roles that are very degrading in terms of race. There's scenes at the beginning with the chef who's in the RV. And it's a very sort of traditional way that African Americans portrayed comedic roles. So, what do we make of this? Especially given, Walter White's letter to Preston Sturges. Also, how do you think audiences reacted to this movie when it was released in December of 1941? Is it similar or different to how you think audiences would react now? And why do you think the critical opinion about the film has gotten a lot more positive over the years? Why is this a much more highly regarded film in the 21st century than it was in 1941? And finally, Hollywood often makes films that turns the lens inward and satirizes itself. In fact, this could be considered a genre unto itself. I actually think that the film analysis paper is about films where Hollywood is commenting upon Hollywood. So what conventions and tropes are part of this Hollywood comments on itself genre? And where are they found in Sullivan's Travels? And what do you think sort of the critical purpose of these kinds of films are? Like, why does Hollywood make these movies satirizing itself or criticizing itself? Is it sort of like self-indulgent, or is there a deeper critical purpose? So that's all I have. And enjoy Sullivan's Travels, and looking forward to talking about it with you guys. Bye.